Stop everything and internalize this immediate, strategic truth. The single greatest vulnerability you possess in any interaction, whether it's a high-stakes negotiation, a crucial social exchange, or even a basic personal discussion, is your neediness. The psychological architecture of modern life is designed to foster dependence, teaching you to believe you must win this approval, need this client, or require this specific relationship to validate your fundamental worth. This dependence is your fatal flaw. The moment your adversary smells need, they instantly acquire the ultimate power to dictate the terms, control the timeline, and reduce your value to the bare minimum. The engine of human leverage is not built on fairness. It is built on exploitation of desperation, and you forfeit all strategic leverage when you are visibly attached to a single outcome. Think about the internal cost. You walk into a room secretly believing you must secure a positive outcome. Your focus shifts entirely from asserting value to pleading for a yes. Your counterpart senses this. They detect the lack of alternatives, the fear of rejection, and the inability to walk away. This awareness allows them to ruthlessly exploit your position, knowing you will concede critical terms just to escape the terrifying vacuum of failure. The paradox of desire and indifference. The greatest strategic paradox is this: what you chase furiously, you repel. What you release, you attract. The secret to ending negotiation instantly, the one power move that compels them to cave, is not aggression or superior intellect. It is the structural certainty of unconditional self-sovereignty, the visible, unyielding posture that you are entirely prepared to walk away. The power of indifference is the power of true choice. Machiavelli, with his cold, strategic clarity, provided the measure of what truly moves people. Men sooner forget the death of their father than the loss of their patrimony. This statement is profoundly strategic. It teaches that deep emotional needs, the loss of a father representing sentiment and affection, are quickly superseded by the immediate, tangible reality of material stability, patrimony, representing resources and results. You must build your power on the rock of self-sufficiency, making your needs irrelevant to the negotiation. This video is the blueprint for creating that structural strength. We will teach you how to replace the fatal flaw of need with the absolute power of choice. Are you ready to stop begging for a favorable outcome and start commanding it? Now, drop this affirmation in the comments and commit to the discipline. My leverage is my shield. I fear no exit. Number 1. Emotional immunity. The first crucial strategic pillar is to achieve absolute emotional immunity. This is the highest form of psychological defense. It mandates achieving a state of complete, unreadable composure that actively prevents all emotional leakage when you are under pressure. For the majority of men, a surge of anger, fear, or frustration is an immediate command for chaotic action, causing them to hemorrhage power. You must internalize the brutal truth that Machiavelli knew centuries ago. He who lets himself be moved by insults is already defeated. The moment your adversary successfully dictates your emotional state, you have already surrendered control of your mind, your decisions, and your ultimate outcome. Emotional transparency is not a virtue. It is a critical strategic vulnerability. When you allow genuine frustration, excitement, or fear to show externally, you are providing your adversaries with a precise, exploitable map of your psychological triggers. A predictable emotional reaction transforms you into an easily maneuvered target, which is the definition of losing leverage. Your goal is to achieve total internal separation, to feel the full spectrum of human emotion, but to display only what strategically serves your purpose. This discipline ensures that while you are experiencing the heat of the moment internally, your external presence remains cold, analytical, and utterly unreadable. This unreadable composure is your fortress against manipulation. To enforce this immunity when under direct attack, you must install an active countermeasure against the emotional reflex. The weak react impulsively, the powerful engage a disciplined process. The instant a provocation hits, a cutting remark, an insult, or a direct challenge, you must impose a non-negotiable, deliberate pause. Do not speak. Do not shift posture. Control your breath. This pause breaks the reflexive neurological link between stimulus and action, denying the adversary the immediate reaction they seek. In that brief moment of stillness, you process the emotion not as a command, but as intelligence. Ask yourself, what is the adversary's true goal? What information about my state are they trying to extract? Does responding emotionally advance my long-term strategic position? Based on the cold analysis, you execute a strategic response that redirects the narrative away from your feelings and toward a favorable outcome. This ensures your response is calculated, not defensively emotional. Consider a high-pressure scenario. A rival calls your strategy naive and amateurish in a public forum. The emotional reaction sees the individual immediately flush, their voice tighten, and they launch into a frantic defense of their intelligence. The result? They confirm the rival's assessment that they are easily rattled and vulnerable to attacks on their ego, forfeiting psychological leverage. The strategist executes the freeze, absorbs the insult, and maintains an unreadable level gaze. He then pivots. That's an aggressive label. Let's focus on the data. Which specific risk metric, in your opinion, should be prioritized above the others? The result: the strategist rejects the rival's emotional frame, forces the discussion back onto factual data, and establishes himself as the calm, decisive authority in the room. By denying the external world the gratification of your reaction, you transform their aggressive actions into your own personal source of intelligence and psychological leverage. You stop being a pawn reacting to their moves and start becoming the sovereign player who dictates the terms of engagement. Number 2. The scarcity principle. The second strategic pillar in mastering the single power move is the structural enforcement of the scarcity trap. This law dictates that you must surgically control your visibility, for the colossal, fatal delusion most men harbor is the belief that universal availability and perpetual presence automatically translate into importance. They are profoundly mistaken. Strong men understand the devastating silent power of strategic absence. Your goal is to transform yourself from a readily available asset into a prized, high-demand commodity. You have no strategic mandate to be present at every gathering, nor must you instantly reply to every message. Sometimes the single most potent action you can execute is simply not being there. The psychological mechanism of contempt. This principle operates universally, dictated by the immutable psychology of scarcity. The friend who is always available becomes utterly taken for granted. The individual who is selective with their time becomes instantly appreciated. The man who responds to every text message instantly broadcasts desperation and lack of higher priorities. Conversely, the man who deliberately rations his presence signals high value because he is genuinely busy and pursuing more important, greater objectives. Strong men understand that scarcity is the engine of value. Machiavelli warned against the peril of overexposure, stating, "Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand." This is the core psychological mechanism. When your presence is a constant, common commodity, you become predictable and ordinary. What they see constantly, they devalue. Conversely, when your presence is meticulously, selectively deployed, you instantly become valuable, sought after, and your influence holds measurable weight. Your strategic mandate is to learn to withdraw strategically to command demand. You must execute strategic withdrawal in every domain, making your absence an active, communicative tool. If a colleague sends a non-urgent email, the weak man replies in 5 minutes, setting a fatal expectation of instant availability. The strategist replies only after a calculated delay of several hours, often outside the typical workday. This is not rudeness. This strategically teaches the recipient that your time is a finite, valuable resource, forcing them to prioritize their next message to you and simultaneously increasing the weight of your eventual response. You are training your environment to respect your schedule. You should never wait until the energy has peaked and conversation stalls. Leave the gathering while the engagement is still high, or end a conversation while the other party still has questions. This creates a powerful psychological deficit, a vacuum of your presence that compels people to initiate the next contact and makes them want more of you, not less. You leave them with a strong, lingering, positive impression. You must eliminate the pattern of being reliably available. You transform yourself into a commodity that is prized by picking and choosing when and where you appear. This forces others to pay attention, to wonder what grand strategy you are executing while absent, and to genuinely appreciate you when you decide to grant them your presence. Your ultimate goal is to revoke the privilege of your presence when it is being abused or taken for granted. This is a cold, necessary strategic maneuver that creates immediate leverage. Imagine a high-stakes business negotiation scenario. You are seeking a critical partnership, and the opposing firm knows you are eager, so they delay responding to your final proposal for 2 weeks, attempting to generate anxiety and force concessions. The predictable outcome from a weak position would be frantic follow-up emails, lowering your price with each message. Instead, you execute strategic withdrawal. You deliberately halt all communication, and instead of waiting, you subtly but visibly launch a small, promising public pilot project with a competitor. The strategic result is immediate. The original firm sees this action and realizes you are not dependent on them. They are compelled to break their own silence and rush back to the table, demonstrating that they are more afraid of your absence and your alternatives than they are of losing the deal. This structural shift ensures that you are seen as an essential asset who must be pursued, not a guaranteed presence who can be ignored. Every time you successfully execute a controlled absence, you add another layer of psychological weight to your eventual appearance. Your absence is an active strategic tool. Use it to increase your value. You are forcing the world to recognize your worth by temporarily denying them access to it. Number 3, the walk-away posture. The third strategic pillar in mastering the single power move is the cultivation of the walk-away posture. This posture is built upon the structural reality of having viable alternatives, Plan B, Plan C, and Plan D, which grants you the ultimate power of non-neediness. In any high-stakes interaction, the single greatest source of an adversary's leverage is your perceived desperation, your visible attachment to a single, successful outcome. When you are genuinely prepared to lose the deal, you become psychologically and strategically immune to pressure. Machiavelli defined the necessary defensive and offensive balance for any successful leader. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. The implication for you is profound. You must possess the cunning of the fox to create and maintain alternatives that allow you to escape any trap, and the strength of the lion to enforce your demands because you can afford the exit without suffering ruin. The strategic cost of singular focus. The structural reality is that the cost of a singular focus is absolute vulnerability. If you commit all your time, energy, and ambition to one option, the failure of that outcome translates directly into a personal and financial catastrophe. This threat creates paralyzing emotional dependency and ensures you will fold under pressure. Conversely, the individual who possesses multiple, strong alternatives achieves a crucial psychological benefit: detachment. They know that the failure of Plan A is merely a neutral data point, indicating the necessary switch to Plan B, not an emotional disaster. They negotiate with a visible, cool readiness to walk away because they are structurally protected. Your adversary, sensing your deep-seated lack of desperation, is forced to conclude that they hold little to no leverage over you. Your true power flows from the fact that you are not beholden to any single person's yes or no. Consider a high-stakes scenario involving securing a critical investor for your venture. The unprepared entrepreneur dedicates all resources to one investor, mentally spending the money before the deal is signed. When the investor attempts to leverage the situation, demanding an unreasonable 70% equity stake, the entrepreneur is forced to concede out of visible desperation. The cost: loss of control and massive equity. The strategist approaches the primary investor having already quietly secured verbal agreements and viable term sheets from two separate Plan B and Plan C sources. When the primary investor attempts to leverage the 70% demand, the strategist remains composed. He states, "That valuation is outside our model. We have other funding options that align better with our long-term equity goals. We'll need to stay at 30%. The result? The investor is compelled to meet the terms or lose the deal entirely because they realize the entrepreneur's survival is not dependent on their decision. To build this necessary level of structural resilience, you must apply the mandate universally. Never rely on a single source of income. Cultivate at least two separate, reliable revenue streams to eliminate the fear of a single paycheck loss. For any critical project, ensure you have multiple capable allies who can immediately step into a vital role if the primary person betrays you or fails. Trust the system, not the emotional bond. Never rely on a single niche skill. Continually develop secondary high-value competencies so that if your primary industry shifts or collapses, you are not rendered obsolete. The ultimate goal is to eliminate any single point of catastrophic failure. When you maintain multiple options, you transform external uncertainty into internal stability. Your unshakable readiness to walk away is precisely what compels others to meet your terms. You make yourself truly unpredictable, because your adversaries can never accurately calculate the total cost of pushing you too far. The wise man never bets his entire kingdom on a single throw of the dice. Number 4. The non-reaction trap. The fourth law in mastering the single power move is the psychological discipline of the non-reaction trap. This is the mastery of using silence, dismissiveness, and cool, measured responses to deny your adversary the emotional validation they seek, thereby neutralizing their leverage entirely. The entire power dynamic shifts when you stop being a predictable source of explosive reaction and become an unreadable, impenetrable force. The fundamental principle governing this strategy is the understanding that your emotional reaction is the only true currency your adversary possesses against you. They attack with insults, threats, or false urgency because they are trying to buy your composure, your fear, or your defensiveness. When you deny the transaction, their currency becomes worthless. Machiavelli defined the necessary strategic trade-off that validates this cold response. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Applied here, fear is the strategic respect achieved when people realize their attempts to provoke or rattle you have failed absolutely. When you meet their aggression with unyielding, cool silence, you instill a necessary psychological hesitation, the fear of encountering a force that cannot be calculated or controlled. To execute the non-reaction trap, you must train yourself to bypass the emotional reflex and engage the strategic mind. When an insult or accusation is launched, your first move is not to defend, but to pause. Let the silence hang for a beat longer than is socially comfortable. This forces the adversary to either fill the vacuum with more information or become visibly uncomfortable, signaling that you possess the psychological upper hand. You use silence to absorb the impact and decide your move, while the other side is paralyzed by anticipation. If a response is required, it must be minimalist and non-committal. You deny the insult's significance by treating it as irrelevant noise. A simple, level-toned, "noted," or "I appreciate the feedback," followed by an immediate pivot back to the objective. This surgical dismissal communicates, "Your attack is too low value to engage with, and I have higher priorities." When an adversary attempts to draw you into their emotional frame, you refuse to justify or explain. You simply redirect the conversation to the factual, strategic objective. "My current focus is on achieving X. How can we align on the next actionable step?" You deny them the power of dictating the emotional terms of the debate. Consider a high-pressure scenario. A subordinate, attempting to avoid responsibility for a missed deadline, aggressively blames your process in front of the team. The emotional response is that you immediately defend your process, raising your voice and arguing details. Result: you confirm the subordinate's assessment that you are easily provoked, validating their authority to criticize you. The strategic non-response is that you execute a deliberate pause. You maintain calm eye contact, then state, without anger, "Thank you for the input." Let's redirect. "John, what specific corrective steps did you take when you first identified this risk?" The result: you deny the emotional confrontation, shift the focus immediately back to the subordinate's responsibility, and demonstrate that your composure is an unshakable, non-negotiable fact of the working environment. The adversary is neutralized by your refusal to fight on their terms. By consistently deploying the non-reaction trap, you establish a reputation for unreadability. This makes you a high-cost target, compelling people to approach you with the respect and precision required by someone they know they cannot rattle or control. Number 5. The autonomy signal. The fifth crucial law in mastering the single power move is the structural discipline of the autonomy signal. This is the necessary act of surgically eliminating all forms of justification, apology, and oversharing from your behavior to project absolute, non-negotiable certainty. The moment you offer a torrent of unnecessary details or explanations for your choices, you transform your autonomy into a public negotiation. You must understand that the human tendency to judge by appearance is not a flaw, but a law of society that you can exploit. Machiavelli defined this essential reality. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. This statement is your blueprint. You cannot afford to have your external appearance, your communication style, contradict the internal reality of your self-sovereignty. A torrent of justification is perceived by the majority as a visible signal of internal weakness and a desperate need for external approval. By eliminating this verbal leakage, you project an unshakable inner certainty that forces others to respect your choices, even if they don't understand them. The urge to explain is a deeply rooted psychological reflex, the inner apology, born from a paralyzing fear of conflict and a desire to control what others think. This reflex is a fatal flaw in power dynamics. Every minute you spend justifying your decision to a client, a colleague, or a friend is a minute you are teaching them that your position is fragile and subject to their approval. The act of oversharing, revealing detailed plans, vulnerabilities, or personal drama, is equally destructive. It provides an adversary with unnecessary intelligence and emotional leverage. The strategist knows that their private life, their fears, and their next moves are classified assets. By refusing to leak this information, you maintain the necessary ambiguity and psychological distance to operate freely. When you are unexplained, you are strategically unpredictable. To execute the autonomy signal, you must enforce 3 strict behavioral mandates. Purge all minimizing or defensive language. Stop using just, it may be, or I think. Replace the language of tentative suggestion with declarative finality. Instead of I think we should do X, state the decision is X. Proceed accordingly. Never apologize for setting a necessary boundary or making a choice that affects no one but yourself. The boundary is a statement of reality, not a request for forgiveness. When you need to leave, simply state, I must go. I will connect next week. Do not explain the why. The explanation invites the adversary to debate your priorities. When asked probing, unnecessary questions, give minimum viable answers. Practice the 2-sentence rule. State the essential fact, and then immediately pivot the conversation back to a neutral, high-value topic. Deny the adversary the ammunition they seek. By consistently deploying the autonomy signal, you train your environment that your choices are based on an unchallengeable internal logic, not on fragile emotions seeking approval. This transformation is the visible sign of your commitment to self-sovereignty. Number 6. The psychological reversal, the 6th law in mastering the single power move, is the application of the psychological reversal. This is the strategic technique of transforming your external presence from one that chases approval into one that is pursued, forcing adversaries and allies alike to invest their energy and resources in securing your proximity and agreement. This power dynamic shifts entirely when you project genuine indifference to the outcome of their decision. This reversal is founded upon the most primal human drive, as defined by Machiavelli. The desire to acquire is a natural and ordinary thing. The strategist understands that this drive is a resource you can actively harness. People are inherently motivated to pursue that which is difficult to obtain. When you project neediness, you signal easy acquisition, and the desire to acquire you diminishes instantly. When you project indifference, you become a challenging, high-value prize, and their desire to acquire you increases exponentially. When you chase, whether it's a promotion, a client, or a relationship, you commit the following psychological errors. You confirm availability. You signal that your time and attention are cheap and abundant, lowering your perceived value. You grant leverage. You communicate that your happiness or success is contingent on their yes, immediately handing them control. You become predictable. Your actions are motivated by their response, allowing them to easily anticipate and counter your next move. The psychological reversal flips this dynamic. You stop investing energy in chasing, and instead, you invest energy in becoming the resource that must be chased. To execute this reversal, your behavior must shift to communicate non-neediness and high value. When you receive a positive signal, an inquiry, praise, or an offer, do not react with immediate, overwhelming enthusiasm. A slight, deliberate pause before acknowledging the offer communicates that you are assessing its true value, not just accepting validation. Maintain a life and focus that is genuinely independent of the adversary's actions. Your time must be visibly scarce. When you are unavailable, it must be because you are pursuing higher priorities, not because you are playing games. This forces the adversary to adjust their schedule to yours. The most effective way to project indifference is to have genuine options. When your adversary senses that you have viable Plan B and Plan C, that their failure to agree is only a minor inconvenience, they will fight against their fear of loss, compelling them to meet your terms. Consider a scenario where you are selling a high-value service to a client who is stalling and demanding lower pricing. The chasing fail. You desperately follow up every day with new proposals and justifications, showing your need for the contract. Result: the client feels safe, knowing you will concede more over time. The strategic reversal. You send one firm, final offer, then execute a controlled silence. You invest the saved energy into securing a different, equally high-profile project. When the original client finally calls, you return the call only after a delay and communicate a new reality. Our capacity is now limited due to the X project. My original price is now firm, and if we proceed, we start in 3 weeks. The result: the client panics. They are forced to quickly acquire your services at your original price, viewing the delay and the increased difficulty as proof of your high value and external demand. The person who stops begging for a favorable outcome and simply asserts a high, unchallengeable standard creates an irresistible magnetic force. Your refusal to be desperate is the ultimate psychological move that compels others to invest their energy in chasing you. The strategic campaign is now complete. You have systematically acquired the definitive blueprint for achieving absolute self-sovereignty in any high-stakes interaction. You have internalized the brutal truth that your fatal flaw was neediness, and you have surgically replaced it with the structural strength of choice. You have successfully constructed the irresistible fortress, the structural and psychological position where you are impervious to external pressure. Machiavelli defined the immutable necessity of this strength. The chief foundations of all states are good laws and good arms, and you cannot have good laws where you do not have good arms. You now possess both the good laws and the good arms to enforce your will. The moment of truth has arrived. The world is saturated with people who talk about leverage. It is desperately short of people who wield it. Your final challenge is to commit to this self-sovereignty without flinching. Your environment will test you instantly. They will demand concessions and attempt to provoke your weakness. Your old programming will try to make you apologize for your demands. You must silence that inner voice and choose the strategic action. The man who has truly mastered this discipline requires no applause. He does not apologize for the space he occupies. He simply asserts his will and lets the effectiveness of his outcome serve as his only defense. You are no longer the supplicant who hopes for a favorable outcome. You are the architect who commands it. Your unshakable readiness to walk away is precisely what compels them to meet your terms and end the negotiation instantly. That knowledge, the unblinking certainty that you can afford the exit, is the single most powerful move you will ever make in any negotiation, personal or professional. Make your commitment binding. Drop this final, irreversible affirmation into the comments. My dominion is absolute. I am unchallengeable.